Welcome to Yakima Southwest Rotary, the
most awesomest club in the world.
All right, I have Tony with invocation.
Thank you. Would you bow your heads with me, please? Heavenly Father, thank you for this day and the reminder of how blessed we are to call Yakima Valley home. Direct us as a club to use the blessings you've poured over us to help others in our community and the world. Thank you for this Easter week and what it means to each of us. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Let's see. Tim, are you going to do introduction of... Okay. Yep. Steve, welcome. Steve Altmeyer from downtown. Nicole, do you want to introduce your guests? Welcome, Vicki. We'll introduce her other guest. He's our speaker. Thanks, Tim. All right, next we have some club announcements. Years of service. Jill Falk, 25 years of service to the club. Thank you, Jill. Craig Dwight, 15 years of service. Thank you, Craig. Does that sound right, Craig? Okay. Martin Streit with 14 years. Ann Bowen with 12. And Riley Wilkinson with 6 years of service. Thank you. All right, we got some birthdays coming up in the past. April Fool's, Jim Davis. Happy birthday, Jim. Hope you had a good one. Richard has got his coming up. I don't know if I thought I saw Richard here, but maybe that was just last meeting. But Richard on the 7th, and then Tammy's coming up on the 10th. So happy birthday to everyone. For new members, new member orientation, if you're newer to the club, I'd say in the 2 to 4 years, if you don't know what the word fireside means, if you want to learn about committees and other committees and just fellowship with some great Rotarians, Lizzie and Tammy are hosting a member orientation on the 14th. Tammy's email address is in the bulletin, so check the bulletin to get signed up for that. Last Thursday, we were at Camp Hope serving dinner. It was a great combination of efforts. We got teamed up with YV Tech. Thanks to Craig for that. That was a great idea in sharing them. So they prepped all the food, which was great. I think, Angie, how many tins of lasagna did they make? 15. So 15 total. We delivered 3 to Rod's house, and then we served probably 10 tins at Camp Hope, and a couple people got seconds, which was great. So thank you to Mark Hummel, Bruce Willis, Tom Robert, Angie Sainsbury, and then Kathleen Wilmus, and then myself were all there serving for that. It was a great service and a great time. So Angie and Brittany, thank you for organizing that. And we have another one coming up on May 30th. And that one we may be preparing the food as well. So we'll have a little bit longer time to spend together for the next set. Our Rotary auction is fast approaching, April 28th. I believe we have about 22 seats, maybe a few more, but we have about 22 seats left for that auction. We've got a capacity of 300 this year, so we're doing extremely well from filling that up. So thank you for all of those that have RSVP'd. Thank you to all of our table sponsors. And I'm going to give some shout outs here to our sponsors. So I'm going to thank Taylor for kind of setting a precedent. Taylor's presidential year. Kashmir Valley Bank was title sponsor for 2 years, and we had been a few years without a title sponsor, a true title sponsor. So I put I put some pressure on our company. I said, hey, we need to jump up from a community sponsor and be title sponsor. So Leonard Rickey Investment Advisors is our presenting title sponsor this year. But thank you. I want to thank Taylor for leading that. So he stepped up too. So Kashmir Valley Bank is our beverage sponsor. Elia Castillo is our Farmers Insurance Dessert Dash sponsor. So thank you to those two. Triply Constructions and Stevens and Granados are our entertainment sponsors. So thank you to Triply and Tammy Granados. And then we have Fusion Events, Jason Kildall and his Fusion Events. If you're looking to put on, thank you, Jason. If you're putting on a corporate event, if you're putting on a large personal event or an event like we're doing, he's the person you want to talk to. He's doing a ton for this auction, so I'm giving him a little extra shout out here. I believe, Jason, I'm going to let you do this. So May 24th, he's going to be hosting an open house, and he does party rentals too. So if you need to rent stuff, he does rentals as well for private parties. So thank you, Jason, for being our silent auction sponsor. So no, you don't. You don't. You've earned it, Jason. You've earned it. Look at that.
Do you guys have any idea what you want to do? Do you want to do the $3 door or the $2 door? $2 door? Okay. What percentage of people have signed their dog's name on holiday cards? Dog owners. Do we have an answer? You sure? Very good. 75%. There's a follow-up question, though. Yeah. Okay, since you guys are good at percentages, make sure I have enough questions here. All right, I'll let you go, $1. All right. Okay, let's see. How about you guys? Okay, we'll do 2 tables here then. Yeah. The Australian is a trick question. The Australian Shepherd is from what country? No. Is that your answer? No, it's an American breed. It's from America. America. Yeah, $2. Okay, Taylor, do you guys want the $2 or $3 door? 2? Okay, the largest known dog, according to the Guinness World Records, is a Mastiff, as far as weight. The name is Zorba. How much did it weigh? What's that? 185? Okay. What's that in stones? No, it's 343 pounds, the size of a small donkey. Yeah. All right. You guys back there, I'll put both you guys' tables together. What, do you guys, $2 or $3? Well, we have 2, so. 2? Okay, how often does the Bible mention dogs? No, 14 times. Who'd have guessed it? All right, Bill, your table. $2 or $3? 2? Oh, you guys are all chicken. Okay, approximately how many dogs in the U.S. have been named as a primary beneficiary in their owner's will? How many dogs, approximately, have been named as primary beneficiaries in their owner's will? Within 100. No, just sheer numbers. $50,000? 5,500? No, 1 million. All right, last question for you guys. Okay. I bet I know. In fact, I will match whatever you guys were going to bet. If anybody in this room can come up with this answer, and it's a limited number. What gland do only humans and dogs have? What gland do only humans and dogs have? I was surprised by this. Well, yeah, I give you long enough, you'll come up with every gland in the body. So I think, okay, tick-tock. All right, what's your answer? Anything? Nope, prostate. Yeah, $2, you guys. All right, I got it. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Hold on just 1 second. I got to play with the lights. Oh, boy. This is anybody's guess. Where's my tailor? Can you... I know. He just came and... I know, but our... Yeah. Can you go get Javi to turn this back on again? Taylor. He just did it, but I don't. It's just on the clicker. The main guy. Sorry about that. I'd advance to the next slide, but you're not going to see it, so I'll advance to it anyway. All right, so it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Alex Johnson is a DUI lawyer providing services in Tri-Cities, Yakima, and most of eastern Washington. He graduated from Eisenhower High School in Yakima, Washington, before attending Columbia Basin Community College in Pasco. While at CBC, Alex was a member of the two-time league champion baseball team. After graduating from CBC, Alex attended Washington State University, where he played football. Alex, go Cougs. Alex was a letter winner, and he earned a full-ride athletic scholarship playing football. Alex was the captain his senior year versus University of Oregon and won the WSU Special Teams Player of the Year week honors versus Stanford University in 2001. In his senior year, Alex was named Pac-10 All-Academic Second Team. Alex also is a proud member of the fraternity Alpha Gamma Rho. After graduating from WSU in 2002 with a degree in communications, Alex worked as a case manager at Delory Johnson Law Office before attending at Gonzaga University. Alex graduated from Gonzaga Law in 2007 and shortly thereafter accepted a position with Benton County Prosecutor's Office in Kennewick. Alex left the prosecutor's office in 2009 to enter the private practice. Alex is now a partner at Johnson & Johnson Law Firm. Alex is married to Jennifer Johnson, who is also an attorney with the firm. Alex is passionate about and a WSU alum. He is a board member for the Cougar Athletic Foundation. and devoting time to an effort to and betterment of WSU athletics. Together, Alex and Jennifer have 3 kids, Olivia, Luke, and Blake. In his spare time, Alex enjoys traveling, playing the guitar, and attending sporting events and spending time with friends and family. So I'm going to have you come up in just a second. Alex is also a longtime friend of mine. We went to Eisenhower together and WSU. We played on the WSU football team together. A few years back, knowing that Alex, being a friend and an acquaintance, but a few years back, just no different than being here, having a meal, having a drink or two, my wife and I were on our way back with our kids from Bellbreaker, and we were coming back. I was speeding. I got pulled over by a police officer or a state trooper. I wasn't really concerned because I had just had 2 beers, but it was honestly the first time I'd ever been pulled over. I remember having conversations with Alex prior to, and he said, you know, one of the things you don't want to do is a field sobriety test. And I never really understood why until you're standing on the side of an exit with a state trooper saying, hey, I want you to do a field sobriety test on the side of a road. And Alex would say that's the perfect environment. You shouldn't be doing a test, speeding cars, nighttime, etc. So I personally went through and am thankful that he's a friend, and I had some conversations with him about that. But anyway, so just my own personal experience, but it was a first. I had never been through anything like that. The interesting thing is whatever. My kids were with us because we just went out to have dinner, and I had 2 beers. And so I'm just going to tell the story a little bit more, but so the state troopers, of course, he's like, where are you coming from? And I'm thinking, oh, my kids are in the back seat. I'm not gonna lie. I could tell a quick fib, you know, and say, oh, you just coming from a friend's house or pick the kids up from a play date. But I said, oh, is that a Bellbreaker? So then when he came back, he took it to a step further, and then based on my answers, he assumed that I was too intoxicated and shouldn't be driving. So that's why he wanted to give me a field sobriety test. So long story short, I didn't have a DUI. I didn't have to hire Alex to represent me, but that's like a simple thing that could happen to any one of us, and coming from an event. So anyway, with that, it's my great pleasure to invite Alex to come up here and talk about his profession and expertise, which is DUI defense. Alex?
Thanks, Dirk. I've had the opportunity to speak here before. It's been several years, and I've spoke at events like this quite a bit, and I found it always best to just keep it pretty low-key and conversational, and just kind of talk about what it is that I do. And it seems to be a pretty, I think, pretty interesting topic for most people, because I think, like Dirk said, people always seem to want to know what to do in that particular kind of circumstance, and like worst case scenario, if you get arrested, and then go through the process, what that looks like and how much it costs. So if anybody has any questions, just go ahead and ask while I'm doing this. It's not going to be an interruption or anything, but I just kind of guide you through what it is that I do, and what DUIs look like. Obviously, it's fairly self-explanatory how you get yourself into that situation. But DUIs, I think most people understand that there's a legal limit in the state of Washington when it comes to alcohol-based DUIs. The legal limit is a .08. There was some legislation that was introduced here recently to try to lower it to an 0.5, like Utah recently did. But as far as I know, that has not passed, so the legal limit is still a .08. But what people often don't know is that in an alcohol-based DUI scenario, which is the most common, and I'll talk about some other types of DUIs, you can be prosecuted and convicted for a DUI even if your blood or breath alcohol content is under the legal limit. For some people, and I know that there's some people out there that, oh man, if I have one drink, I know that I shouldn't be driving. And that's very, very common. My wife is the same way. If she has one drink, she doesn't feel comfortable driving. And I know for a fact that she's under the legal limit because I have a breath test machine that I brought. This is, people refer to, they say breath test machines. Well, there's different types of breath test machines, quote unquote. This is something I purchased several years ago that I've used on myself lots of times, my friends, just to get a kind of a better understanding of what it feels like to be a .08 or a .04. This is what is used by the Washington State Patrol, and I'm going to kind of digress here for a moment. This is called a PBT, or Portable or Preliminary Breath Test. This one is the only one used by law enforcement. It's an Alco sensor FST. It's made by a company called Intoximeters. The State Patrol uses this one. I got my hands on one a few years ago, and it's been pretty fun to use at parties. So I know Kathy, you know, if she's feeling, now let me finish, in a sporting mood, we're going to use her as a guinea pig here later, so that you get an understanding of where you are in that spectrum of you know, a .08. I can tell you from my own experience. I've done this a lot of times. It's, I think, important. I mean, it's fun to do, but it's also important for my work to understand what that feels like. So I know when I have a glass of wine or something and you start to kind of feel the effects first, you know, kicking in, you get that kind of euphoric feeling, you kind of stress starts to kind of dissipate, and you start to first feel the effects. I feel at that point that I'm about an 04. Okay, so I'm half the legal limit. So I personally know when I'm a .08 that it's probably not a good idea for me to be driving, and I'm not like a rookie drinker. I went to WSU and I went to Gonzaga Law School, and so I'm not new to this. But anyhow, if anybody's interested, I've got that with me, and I've got a lot of different, the tubes are connected to, I've got lots of them. You just have to wait 15 minutes before you blow into it. So if anybody's interested in doing it, then you can come see me afterwards. But getting back to it, yeah, there's two different ways to get prosecuted. One, the prosecutor has to prove that your ability to drive has been affected by the alcohol that you've consumed. That is if there is no breath or blood test, or if you're under the legal limit. I have multiple cases right now where the person accused of DUI is well under the legal limit, but they're still, the state or the city, whatever, is proceeding forward prosecuting a DUI. The most common one is that the city or state just has to prove that you're over the legal limit and don't necessarily have to prove that your ability to drive is affected. So I have had a lot of clients that get pulled over for speeding. They decide to do the field sobriety test, which again, and I can get to that in a little bit greater length, is not a good idea to do. But perform them. They don't do well for whatever reason. They blow over the legal limit. But the quote-unquote affected by case is not a very strong case, but they're over the legal limit, right? So those are the two ways you can get prosecuted for DUI, either just that your ability to drive has been affected, and of course that's through, they prosecute that through observations made by law enforcement, you know, that there's slurred speech and bloodshot, watery eyes and poor driving and somebody's uncoordinated actions, thick tongue, all that kind of stuff. That all plays into what the prosecutor uses to try to convict somebody of a DUI if they're either under or over the legal limit. So is there any questions about that? Two different ways you can get prosecuted. You don't have to be over the legal limit. That's for an alcohol-based DUI. For years and years, when I first started prosecuting cases, and I was the state patrol prosecutor down in Benton County for 2 years, and prosecuted a lot of marijuana-based DUIs, and at that time there was no legal limit for marijuana. Marijuana was illegal at the time, so there's no legal limit for it. When it was legalized back in 2012, the state legislature had to come up with a legal limit, and I know that these numbers don't mean much to you, but it's 5 nanograms per milliliter of active THC in your system. That's the legal limit, okay? It is virtually nothing, okay? The powers that be asked the State Patrol to do a study to determine what the legal limit should be for marijuana-based DUIs. The State Patrol took their time, they did the research, they did testing, and they proposed to the legislature that the legal limit be 20 nanograms per milliliter. The legislature said, okay, thank you, we're going to make it 5. Okay, so, and I think the reason being is that alcohol and marijuana are very, very different when they get into your system. Marijuana, when it's introduced, it absorbs quicker, you get high quicker, and then it dissipates out of your system. At least the euphoric, the active part of marijuana, it burns off faster than alcohol. Okay, so to go back, and I'm sorry to be jumping around here, but for what they call the per se legal limit prosecution for DUI, that you're over the legal limit for alcohol or marijuana, the law states that that has to be obtained within 2 hours of driving. Okay, so in a marijuana situation, when you're pulled over, there's no breath test for marijuana. So what they have to do, what law enforcement has to do is generally, and somebody can volunteer, yeah, go ahead and give me a blood test. They have to call a judge or email a judge. They have to get in contact with a judge, get a search warrant approved, execute a search warrant, take somebody to a hospital and draw their blood. That's the only way in the state of Washington that you can have an evidential test for marijuana. There's no urine test, there's no breath test, there's no mouth swab test for marijuana. The only test in the state of Washington is through blood. So marijuana is introduced, it absorbs quicker and it burns off quicker, so the legal limit is, my opinion is that they made it, the legal limit lower because of the burn off and the having to get testing in the back, and they were afraid it was just going to all burn out of your system by the time they got around to drawing blood. Does that make sense? Okay, all right. So, but a question I get very frequently about marijuana-based DUIs is, everybody hears, well, I smoked weed like 3 weeks ago, right? It's still going to be in my blood. You know, it's still going to be in my system. So when you get a marijuana toxicology report back from the state toxicologist, there's 2 different marijuana readings in that. Okay, there's THC, which is the psychoactive component of marijuana that gives you the euphoric feeling and makes you feel high. There's also carboxy THC, which is the residual marijuana that's left in your system that doesn't have any impact on your motor skills or your ability to drive. So I've had a few DUI cases where somebody who's been accused of a marijuana DUI, they get a blood test, it comes back, and all of the active THC by the time the blood was drawn was out of their system, and all that was left was carboxy THC, which makes it extremely difficult to prosecute a DUI case when you don't have any active THC in your system. So there's a big difference in the two, but there's legal limits obviously for both. Then there are the DUIs that nobody really thinks about, which are the prescription drugs DUIs. I've had one recently where a young guy was prosecuted for Ambien. Ambien is, in my experience handling DUIs, I know it's a very useful medication for a lot of people, but it is flat out scary when it comes to these Ambien DUIs. Ambien is, for those that don't know, is a sleep medication. So some individuals, they've had bad reactions to Ambien to where they are at home, they take their Ambien, they go to sleep, and then they wake up in a jail cell, and they have absolutely no idea how they got there. I prosecuted a gentleman in Kennewick years ago that had 4 DUIs. They were all Ambien DUIs. He didn't drink. He didn't smoke marijuana. He had 4 Ambien DUIs. He had finally decided, well, maybe I shouldn't take Ambien anymore. I'll never forget, though, he caused an accident at a big intersection in Kennewick. He rear-ended somebody at an intersection, and then they pulled off into a McDonald's parking lot, and then he pulled into the parking lot and then ran into somebody in the parking lot. But doesn't remember any of it. So those cases, there's obviously no legal limit for Ambien. There's no legal limit for morphine. There's no legal limit for fentanyl. And I've represented people that have had that in their system when they were driving and when they were arrested for DUI. So the prosecutor, me in that particular case, had to prove, if I wanted a conviction, I had to prove beyond any reasonable doubt that the medication that they were taking affected their ability to drive. Those are a lot harder cases for prosecutors to prove, because most of the time when you get folks sitting in a jury, most of those people take some sort of prescription medication, and they have a lot tougher time convicting somebody of a crime when they were taking medicine that was prescribed to them by a doctor in the manner in which it was prescribed. I had a very long, drawn-out trial, not to be storytelling here, but when I was a prosecutor, it lasted, for DUIs, 3 or 4 day trials are very long. But a woman wrecked her car. She had people in the car. She flipped it 5 or 6 times. She had about 7 different medications in her system, all of which were prescription, all of which were within therapeutic range. But she caused this accident for no real reason. And we tried it for, I think, 3 or 4 days. The jury spent half of a day out, and she was acquitted. Even though I felt like I had a very strong case against her, they did not want to prosecute her. They did not want to convict her, I should say, of a DUI because, hey, you know, I take those same medications, you know. So a jury doesn't really like to, in my experience, looks a little bit more favorably for those cases. Yes?
Do those drugs that you're talking about, the prescription drugs, say on don't drive?
Most of them do. Most of them say
Do you get that in the evidence?
caution. Yeah, absolutely. Most of those, you know, when you're prosecuting cases like that, you'll have a toxicologist or a professional that goes up there and will talk about certain medications and how, or controlled substances, whatever they are, and they have the ability to impair somebody's driving. Absolutely. So, yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I'm curious how that goes when you have somebody say they're taking Ambien, even if it does say that they're not allowed to drive.
Right.
But then they do it without their own knowledge.
Right.
How does that go in court?
So DUI is not an intent-based crime. It's like driving on a suspended license. You don't have to know. I mean, DUIs are strange, right? It's one of those crimes, quote unquote, where we're all sitting here drinking, and it's legal. It's legal to drink. Then it's legal to go out into the parking lot and get in your car and drive. That's all legal. Except it's illegal to drink to the point where your ability to drive is affected or you're over the legal limit. How the heck are you supposed to know where the legal limit is? You know, it's like somebody mentioned this once. It's like if you're allowed to go into a grocery store and take up to $10 worth of items from a grocery store. You're allowed to do that, and it's not illegal. You can go in and take $10 worth of, you know, bread or eggs or whatever, but nothing has a price tag on it, right? You don't know, you know, how much you've taken. You have to kind of guess. So it's the best thing to do is just not drive. That's the only way to 100% know that you're going to be safe. But it's not something that you intentionally or knowingly need to do. So yeah, if you're behind the wheel of a car and you're driving, it doesn't matter. When I say suspended license, there's a lot of people that drive around on a suspended license. They have no idea their license is suspended. They're pulled over. They're arrested. They're like, I didn't know my license was suspended. And it's like, well, too bad. That's not an element of the charge. So, yes.
I took Ambien for a while, and I was having a call my friend, have her talk to me on the way to work because I couldn't stay awake because I didn't get enough sleep. I only get like 6 hours of sleep, and sometimes I get 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I was having to like slap my face and so I quit taking it
That's a good idea.
because I couldn't stay awake. I was working on it.
Yeah, that Ambien is scary stuff in my experience. Yeah, yeah. So those are the majority, overwhelming majority of the cases that I handle are alcohol-based DUIs. Not so much with the marijuana and the prescription drugs, but you can get a DUI, alcohol, marijuana, any kind of prescription drug, it doesn't matter. If it affects your ability to drive, you can get a DUI with any of those substances. A DUI is a gross misdemeanor. What that means is it's punishable by up to a year in jail and a $5,000 fine. If you are a .08 and you are convicted, there is certain mandatory minimum sentences that have to be imposed by judges, and judges have no discretion. They can't go under the mandatory minimum sentence. So the lowest level DUI, first offense, low-level breath test, is 24 consecutive hours in jail. You have a 90-day driver's license suspension, a 1-year ignition interlock requirement. Does everybody know what an interlock is? It's this awful device that you have to put in your car and blow into it before your car will start. Then you have to continually blow into it so your car continues to run. So you have to have that for a year. And those run about 125, sometimes more if you have to have an interlock license. So they can really, really add up. Yes?
When did that law take into effect? Because I've been in court before with other people, being witness to somebody, and these people in front of me were on their third and fourth DUI,
Uh-huh.
and had never had to put that device into their car. So.
They had a good lawyer.
You had people there that were on a 7
Yeah.
and it took everything in my power to not stand up and go, what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
And you're saying that the first time they have to put it on, so.
That's if you're convicted of a DUI. So oftentimes when people are charged with DUI, we're able to resolve cases where they're not convicted of a DUI. It's amended to something else that doesn't carry the same requirements. So that's oftentimes, how cases are resolved with the DUI, original DUI charge, and then amendment to something else. But as getting back to the mandatory minimums, there's the 1-year ignition interlock requirement, and then there's 3 years of something called SR22 insurance. So if there's insurance people in the room, they know what SR22 insurance is. It is an endorsement. It's a high-risk endorsement that you have to have as part of your car insurance. It lasts for 3 years. It's fairly expensive, depending on your driving record in your insurance company. You have to have that for 3 years. Usually, you and I, we just go get a driver's license from the Department of Licensing. We don't have to show them proof that we have insurance. The Department of Licensing, if you have an SR22 requirement, they won't give you a license until you show proof that you have SR22 insurance. So once you show proof of that, then they'll give you a driver's license, and then your insurance company charges you a fee for that. So it can be quite expensive. There's also 5 years of probation that carries a first DUI conviction, carries 5 years of probation. Depending on the jurisdiction in which you're convicted, it will kind of depend on whether that probation, how active it is, or whether it's active at all. So it carries some pretty significant consequences. DUIs can get really, really expensive depending on the jurisdiction where you're prosecuted. Yakima is actually not as expensive. You get down to the Tri-Cities. In Richland, for instance, if you're convicted of a first offense DUI, for fines and costs, you're paying almost $3,000 in fines and costs. And that's just for the fines and costs that you pay to the court. That doesn't include what you pay your lawyer. Also with the mandatory minimum sentence includes when you're convicted, you have to go and have an alcohol assessment by a facility that is like an alcohol counseling facility. One of the main ones here in Yakima is Barth Clinic, Barth and Associates. They do alcohol assessments to determine whether somebody has a significant problem with alcohol and requires some sort of alcohol treatment, or whether they have no significant problem and they just recommend doing like a class or two. So there's classes that have to be done. Those are all mandatory terms that are imposed when you're convicted of a DUI. So they're pretty significant. There are 3 charges that if they're amended from DUI to a lesser charge, you're able to avoid some or all of those mandatory terms. The most common reductions, the first 2 are reckless driving. Reckless driving doesn't carry the mandatory jail. It doesn't carry the mandatory interlock requirement. It doesn't carry the 5 years of probation, but it does carry a 30-day license suspension, and it does carry an SR22 requirement. The more favorable resolution for the people that are charged with DUI would be negligent driving in the first degree. That is a misdemeanor. A misdemeanor means it's punishable by up to 90 days in jail and a $1,000 fine. What's commonly known as a Neg 1. They don't carry a suspension, interlock, SR22. It really has no impact on your license in terms of what can happen from a DUI. I mean, it'll probably have an impact on your insurance overall, but it's the most favorable reduction from a DUI that somebody could hope for outside of a dismissal or an amendment to like an infraction, like a speeding ticket. The third one that is not as common is reckless endangerment. That is a gross misdemeanor, and it doesn't carry any of the suspensions or interlock requirements or anything like that. So they have very significant consequences. Yes, sir?
How about physical control? Is that still in the law?
Yes, physical control. Thank you for asking. That's a good question. Physical control. Has anybody ever heard of physical control? Okay. Physical control, Jim, right? Yeah.
I used to prosecute.
Okay, all right.
DUI.
Yeah, so physical control is DUI without the element of driving. So kind of the most common scenario is, and I don't know how many of these we have. Law enforcement, it's middle of the night, they pull up to an intersection, it's green, and the car in front of them's not going, right? So they sit there for an entire cycle, they finally get out, they go and knock on the window, and the person is just asleep. So it happens all the time, all the time. So DUI, what people oftentimes don't realize, they have to prove that somebody's driving. So this person was, as far as law enforcement knows, what they've observed is this person was parking in the middle of the road. Okay, so if you are behind the wheel of a car, the engine's running, the keys are in, it's in drive, you are in what's called physical control. You have control over that motor vehicle, and you are intoxicated. There is an affirmative defense to physical control that prior to being pursued by law enforcement, you move your vehicle safely off the roadway, then you cannot be convicted of a DUI. But then the burden actually shifts to the defense to prove beyond a preponderance of the evidence that you have moved the vehicle safely off the roadway prior to being pursued by law enforcement. I've had a lot of physical control cases. One that I had was, it was 2 o'clock in the morning. It was a bad charge. The guy is in a parking lot. The car's off. The keys are in the cup holder. He's actually sitting in the passenger seat, and he's drunk. So obviously, he's safely off the roadway. He's not in physical control because he's in the passenger seat, but law enforcement still arrested him because he was in the car. But so the times you see that safely off the roadway defense are oftentimes when somebody's in a parking lots oftentimes. Apartment complexes, bars. The car can be running, and they're just sitting behind the wheel, and they're just drunk. So that's physical control. It has the same consequences of a DUI, but it's just DUI without the element of driving. You can get a DUI or a physical control if you're just in the state of Washington. It used to be different, so you can get a DUI. I've had people, I don't know, Vicki and Nicole probably know, people that they pull into their driveway and they're parked and they're getting out of their car, walking to the front of their front door, and they get arrested for DUI. Yeah.
But they were observed driving.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yes, you can get a DUI, physical control. It's not a very meritorious charge oftentimes, but yes, people can. Law enforcement doesn't have to anticipate that there's an affirmative defense to a charge. If you're in physical control, even if you're safely off the roadway, oftentimes you are going to get arrested for physical control. So one of the most common things that I see with physical control is, and oftentimes for DUIs, is husband and wife, they get home, they get into an argument, somebody just wants to get out of the situation, so I'm going to go for a drive or something, and they get a DUI, or they go out into, oftentimes it's apartment complexes, they go out into the apartment complex, they turn on the car because it's cold, they listen to music, and they fall asleep, and they're drunk in their car. Somebody walks by, sees a passed out person, they think they're dead or something. They call the cops show up, and they get arrested for physical control even though they never even moved their vehicle. It happens pretty often. Then it turns to, you're having to defend yourself from this charge. It doesn't seem fair, but it happens pretty frequently. And now you're left in a situation where you got to pony up some dough for a lawyer to go into court and fight it for you. It sucks, but it happens. So in that scenario, just don't get in the car. Go for a walk, man. Go for a walk. Yeah. So that's just kind of a brief overview of what happens in criminal court. And what people don't often know when I first talk to a potential client is that when you get an alcohol-based or marijuana-based DUI, you actually end up having a second case with the Department of Licensing, and it's an administrative case with the Department of Licensing. I say this all the time. I feel like I'm just a broken record. When you get a DUI, you have two cases. You have a criminal case when you go to court and you see the prosecutor and the judge, and then you have an administrative case with the Department of Licensing. And with the Department of Licensing, all they can do, obviously, is suspend your license or impose conditions or restrictions on your ability to drive. But it's still extremely important. I'm assuming that everybody drove here. So it's important for everybody to drive to work and to drive to, you know, all the events that you have to get to in life, getting to kids' sporting events and everything. It's important to drive. I mean, this isn't like, you know, a major city where you can just take public transportation everywhere. Everybody needs to drive. So you only have, when you get a DUI and you have an alcohol, a breath test case, or you're asked to blow into the machine and you refuse, or there's a blood draw where you're over the legal limit, the Department of Licensing is going to get involved. And you only have 7 days from the date of the incident to request a hearing. You actually actively have to request the hearing, and you only have 7 days to do it, and it costs $375 just to request a hearing. And that's before you even get to look at the reports or any of the evidence that's against you. You just have to, oh, all right, I'm going to pay $375 just so I can have the hearing. Then you have an administrative hearing, and it's always over the phone with a hearing examiner from the Department of Licensing. It's like an administrative law judge. So I'm having to have a case in court and with the DOL. And what I tell people is that even though it's the exact same incident, exact same facts, exact same law enforcement officers, those two things have absolutely nothing to do with each other. But defending them, you have to kind of deal with them in concert, right? You have to deal with your DOL case, hopefully win that, keep your license, and then resolve your criminal case to where you don't have a suspension or anything like that. So yeah, go ahead.
I heard that if you deny the field sobriety test, that your license is automatically suspended for 6 months. Is that true?
That is incorrect. No, that is, every part of that is wrong. Yeah, so field sobriety test, and I'll get back to that. Field sobriety tests, and Dirk touched on it, they're 100% voluntary, okay? I tell people, don't do them. Be nice to law enforcement, be respectful. Never do them. They are tests that are absolutely designed to fail, okay? They were conducted by the developed by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or what was called NHTSA. And they were developed in a controlled environment by people who weren't at risk of going to jail, okay? So it's a lot different if I was to bring Dirk up here right now and he had 5 or 6 drinks and we're going to go through the field sobriety test right now, right? There's no wind, there's no cars zooming by, there's no cop with a gun, you know, walking him through the paces of a field sobriety test. And if he fails, okay, well, somebody's going to drive him home. Okay, it's a lot different from when it's 35 degrees outside and you're wearing high heels and you're on gravel and the road's like this, and there's a cop there with a flashlight saying, walk up and down this line. I would imagine that those people are not going to do as well as the people in the controlled environment. So that's why I tell people, just don't do them. A lot of people feel this, I got to show them that I'm fine, right? I got to comply. You know, you're raised to be cooperative with law enforcement and that you're going to do what they tell you to do. It's a horrible idea. All they're trying to do is get you to incriminate yourself. That's what they're trained to do. They're trained to investigate and obtain evidence. Don't give that to them because it's not really, I don't think, real objective evidence, the way that it's scored. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I just said, I was advised not to take a field test, so
Right.
that's what I told them.
And say, you just, I mean, something along the lines of, no, thank you. Just be nice. What's that?
What happens when your dad always used to say, I respectfully decline to take the sobriety test, but then what happens?
Well, if they arrest you, then they arrest you. They're going to make their decision no matter what.
Then they say, you can request a blood test, can you say I want a blood test right now?
Well, you can ask. So what the process would be under that circumstance, and I know we're kind of jumping around, so if you guys have any questions, please just ask. But it's very, very common when somebody gets pulled over and law enforcement, they roll down the window, they can smell the alcohol, they can see somebody, and it looks like they have been drinking, and it smells like they've been drinking, and they say, will you please step out of the vehicle, and would you like to submit to voluntary field sobriety tests? You say, no, thank you. And they say, okay, well, I have one of these here. This is a portable breath test. And then they go through this. There's 3 standardized field sobriety tests. This is not a standardized one. This is a 4th one. And they say, well, would you mind providing a breath sample into this PBT. And what law enforcement has to tell you about this, and most law enforcement screw it up when it comes to this, is they have to first tell you that it's voluntary, and then they have to confirm either through the Washington Administrative Code says through inquiry or observation that you haven't had anything to drink in the last 15 minutes. So they have to either be with you for 15 minutes and confirm that you haven't had anything to drink, or they ask you, when was your last drink? Oh, it was an hour ago. Okay. And then they have to tell you that this does not replace an evidential breath test. This is a what they call non-evidential breath test. So if you blow into this on the side of the road and you're arrested and you go to jail and then you have your trial, the prosecutor cannot bring this test up. Okay? They can't even tell the jury that this exists, unless for some reason the defense would open the door to that, which is oftentimes very silly to do. So they have to tell you this doesn't replace an evidential breath test. So don't take these either. I've never, well, there's exceptions to every rule, but these don't generally go very well for most people. So, so if you're arrested, okay, you're arrested. They take you down to the jail, then they take you into a breath test room, and they sit you down, and you're sit in front of this big breath test machine, okay? And then they go through your constitutional rights with you to make sure you know your constitutional rights. They usually read them to you right when you're arrested, and then they read them to you again at the jail. And then they go through something called your implied consent warnings for breath. So by virtue of you having a Washington State driver's license, you have already consented to giving a breath test if you've been arrested for DUI. So this form lets you know, warning, you're under arrest for DUI, and I'm going to paraphrase. I'm now asking you for 2 samples of your breath. You have the right to refuse this test, and if you refuse this test, your license will be suspended for at least 1 year. If you blow into the machine and you're over a .08, your license will be suspended for at least 90 days, and then it tells you a few other things. Oftentimes then, that's your opportunity to try to call a lawyer in the middle of the night. It's really hard to usually get a hold of somebody in the middle of the night. I used to, but I don't do that anymore. When I first started and I needed clients, yeah, I would, and it was just usually a disaster. Some drunk person that they think that you're working with the police and they're getting you to give them. Kip Kendrick, who's a longtime DUI attorney here in Yakima, is a friend of mine. He'll still answer the phone, and I think Kip's like 74 and he's still answering the phone in the middle of the night. I stopped doing that quickly because I had 3 kids and I wasn't getting any sleep. Yeah.
So, if you haven't had anything to drink
If
for a week,
if you haven't had anything, okay.
you don't have any, you're not on any medication,
Right.
and you get pulled over,
Right.
and the officer says, I think that you're impaired,
Yeah.
you still don't take the test.
Well, if you have had nothing to drink, then you can blow into that because it'll show zeros. I've blown into that 3 times today because I haven't used it in a while and it was all zeros. Yeah. If you haven't had anything to drink, you're fine.
Then it's okay.
Yeah, but if you've had something to drink, I wouldn't risk it. Yeah.
When I did my experience, so my wife, so I was having a conversation with the cop. I said, what happens, I don't want to take the field sobriety. He said, will you take this test? And I said, what happens if I don't take the test? He said, you're going to come down with me to the station.
So that's illegal too, but go ahead.
So he's like, you'll come down to the station and we'll take the breathalyzer there.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting there going, I've had 2 beers, and they're just like, just come out of the car and let's have a conversation, which I think what they're trying to do at that point is get me out of the vehicle to observe me even more.
And that's fine. That's fine.
So anyway, so I got out of the car and then they're like, just take the breathalyzer if you don't feel, we just want to make sure you can drive home safe with your family. And if you don't feel like you're drunk, then take it. So I took it on the side of the road, which I would say you wouldn't, but I was like, I don't want to ruin my Friday. I feel fine. So I did mine on the side of the road. I had 2 beers. I think I had 2 IPAs over an hour and a half at Bellbreaker. I was at .039, .038.
Yeah, and if law enforcement says to you, well, if you don't take this, I'm going to arrest you and take you down to the jail, remember, they're supposed to tell you that this is voluntary. So if they're telling you that if you don't take this, I'm going to arrest you, it doesn't really make it very voluntary. Yeah. So he's violating the Washington Administrative Code by doing that and coercing you into doing that. It happens. I mean, the guy's just trying to do his job. I mean, most of the law enforcement are very, very good people that are just trying to do their job. And that's been in my experience. I've had a lot of very, very positive interaction with law enforcement. Those guys are they're just trying to keep everybody safe. But no, you can't do that. So, you know, it worked out for you, and that's great. But it doesn't always work out for everybody. Now I forgot what I was talking about. Been drinking water, man.
So you're taken downtown.
Yes, sir.
And you blow.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So if you're over the legal limit, in Yakima, it depends on the jurisdiction you're in. Most of the time in Yakima, if it's a state patrolman or a sheriff, oftentimes they'll take you to the state patrol detachment down in Union Gap, so you don't go to the jail. And if you're cooperative and you go through the breath testing process, they will let you go. They'll either have somebody come pick you up or they'll drive you someplace. The state patrol is actually very good about that. If you have DUI history, if you've had a DUI in the past, they will book you. City of Yakima, if you get arrested by a Yakima police officer, they will book you. Anywhere in the Tri-Cities, you will get booked, and they have mandatory 8-hour sobriety hold. Oftentimes, they'll hold you if you have any kind of history. And in the city of Yakima, oftentimes, they'll hold you until you see a judge, until you post $1,000 bail. So it depends on the jurisdiction. They all have different terms. I was talking about the implied consent warnings. So they go through this implied consent, you know, if you refuse, so if you refuse to take a breath test, after they go through these implied consent warnings, if you refuse to take a breath test at the jail, they're going to mark you as refusing. They're going to send that to the Department of Licensing, and then when you request your Department of Licensing, you're trying to defend a 1-year driver's license suspension, okay? So there's been a lot of times where I've had to deal with these refusal DOL hearings, and we lose, and the individual has a 1-year driver's license suspension, and then their DUI is dismissed in court. They're not convicted. The DUI, for whatever reason, it goes away. But they're still suffering the consequences of this Department of Licensing action, and that's why I say they're two completely different things. So that is one thing that people don't often ever know about, is this administrative action with the DOL. And everybody here has been to the DOL, and I hope nobody here works for the DOL. But it is just awful dealing with them. It is awful. It is just the worst. And then they tell my clients, they tell them, you know, they try to give them advice or tell them how to do something, and it's completely wrong. And then we have to go and try to get it fixed. And they work exactly as hard as they want to so they don't get fired. That's been my experience, which is a lot of people, but they're really attracting them to the Department of Licensing. So, in the Department of Licensing, they're out at every turn to get money from you. They're requesting a DOL hearing. They need a ignition interlock, administrative fees. That's the one thing I didn't touch on, is the ignition interlock driver's license. So in the state of Washington, if you are suspended because of a DUI conviction or from an administrative suspension, and you're suspended for 90 days or a year, you can actually drive through your suspension period. You have to get something called an ignition interlock driver's license. So before you can qualify for that license, you have to show proof of SR22 insurance. You have to install an interlock in your car voluntarily. Now, it's not required yet, but you have to put one in your car, and then you have to apply for an interlock license, and then you can drive through your suspension period. So you don't ever have to really stop driving if you're suspended, but there's a bunch of hoops that you have to jump through, and then, of course, you have to have one of those in your car. And if you've got one car and you have to drive, and you've got small kids, it's really awkward for those people that have to explain to their kids why mommy or daddy has to blow into this thing to make their car start. It's awful, but it's a necessary evil oftentimes. So yeah.
I think we'll do questions afterwards.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's fine. I mean, I'm just sitting up here just talking away.
I have one question.
Yes, sir. Hey.
Would you like to join us for a drink later?
Maybe one. I'm supposed to meet my mom and my kids for dinner here pretty soon, though. So.
I thought, Bill, you were going to be first in line to take that.
I'm second. One question.
Yeah.
Do you answer your voicemails in the morning then? You don't answer.
Of course, yeah. Most people don't have my cell phone number, but yeah. I tell you what, though, it is a really, it's happened, unfortunately, a handful of times where it's 2 o'clock in the morning and my phone rings and I pick it up and it's one of my friends, and I'm like, oh no. it's always, oh man, I made a mistake. You know, I got arrested. What should I do? Like, all right, keep your mouth shut. Keep your mouth shut. Be nice. And I always advise people to blow in the machine when they're at the jail. I've never advised anybody to refuse a breath test when they're at the jail. The consequences are significantly higher when you refuse. And then prosecutors, when you turn and you're prosecuting the case, prosecutors oftentimes look less favorably on a DUI refusal case. And what also ends up happening, and this has been something that's, I'm sorry, I'll wrap this up, that has become a lot more frequent over the course of the last several years, is that law enforcement sits you down, they go through the process, you say, do you want to blow in the machine? And you say, no. And you say, okay. They type in refusal, and then they say, okay, now I'm calling a judge, now I'm getting a search warrant, now I'm taking you to the hospital, and we're going to go draw your blood. So now you're dinged up for a refusal, which has, it actually has enhanced penalties if you're convicted, if you refuse a breath test. And then they're going to go get a blood test against you too. So they're going to get their evidence one way or another most of the time. So yeah, I could probably sit here and talk for a lot longer, but I'm going to wrap it up. If you have any questions or anything, so you guys all know Nicole, obviously, and she's been working with us for the last year, and she's a rock star. She's awesome. And then, does everyone know Vicky? Okay. Okay. If you ever have any questions about anything, just let me know. We can get you a business card or whatever, and we can talk DUIs anytime you want. All right. Hey, thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Alex. Alex, here's a water bottle for thank you gift for coming and speaking with us today. Sorry for letting that run a little long, but it's a hot topic, great topic, and thank you for coming today, Alex. So thank you to our greeters, John and Tim. Thank you for Tony for your invocation, Mark for your sergeant at arms, and Alex again for our speaker. With that, our meeting is adjourned.